My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing the 1979 classic Being There, starring Peter Sellers. I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson. Jim, gardening is a big theme of this movie. Do you have a green thumb?
I certainly do. The artificial plants in my house always look impeccable. They're always green and well trimmed. So, yeah, absolutely. How about you?
Well, I thought you were going to say that you had a green thumb from counting all your money. But
No.
no, I don't have a green thumb at all. I know a lot of people get satisfaction out of this working in a garden, but for me, it's like cooking. I don't have a talent for it and get frustrated. So,
Well, I this past summer I tried to grow some vegetables,
mhm.
and it's the first time that I've done that since some grade school project, where you plant them along the side of your house. And it came out really well. I mean, I got tomatoes and green peppers and scallions. But the thing is, it was so much work for such a little payoff. And it really gave me new respect for agribusiness.
Yeah, we have a vegetable garden, and my job is to pick the vegetables. I find that
Oh,
satisfying.
oh, very, very good. It's good of you.
Before we get to the movie, I just want to give you an update on my quest to visit as many presidential historic sites as possible.
Oh, here we go again.
Here we go again. I was at Middlebury College a month ago, and on the way back, I took a detour to see Calvin Coolidge's birthplace in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. It's a lovely little village, and you can see the room where he was born, and in another house, the room where he was sworn in as president. So I would say it's definitely worth going, and this is a totally legitimate presidential thing. Yeah,
How far was it from Middlebury?
I would say it's about an hour and a half, but it's on the way home. I mean, if you're going
Yeah.
south, if you're going to your place in Glens Falls, it would be way out of the way. But if you're going to Massachusetts or New York or even Connecticut, it's on the way.
Yeah, I wonder about the future of these presidential libraries because they get more complicated and more controversial as time goes on. I mean, there's all the flap over Obama's,
Yeah,
which is architecturally, and this is not a political comment, is like the ugliest building I've
yeah,
ever seen in my life.
right, right,
And then you know that Trump's is going to be total in gold. It'll be like a Taj Mahal.
right. Yeah.
So it's just, how many books are in these libraries?
Well, that's the thing too. What do you need a library for? You need all you need is a couple of discs, like
That's
well,
right.
a computer to get to do your research on the links. All right, enough about my travel escapades. So our movie today, Being There, is considered by many to be Peter Sellers' best performance. We've already seen him playing the president, Dr. Strangelove, and in Being There, he plays a potential president. Are you a Peter Sellers fan?
Well, I really am. I didn't pay much attention to him contemporaneously with when he was making these movies, but I've caught on and caught up since. And all you have to do is look at how he uses his face and
Hmm.
his facial expressions and reactions in this film to understand how good he is. I mean, he's not your cheeky British humor wit, which can get tiresome. For me anyway, I don't really like Monty Python that much and all that, but Sellers is in a different category. How about you?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention his facial expressions, but the thing he's most famous for is his voices. And of course, he doesn't have any voices at all in this movie. It's as flat as can be. Our my introduction to Peter Sellers came through the Pink Panther movies,
Yeah, I
uh,
remember
which
those.
was silly and hilarious and perfect for kids. So we watched that with my son all the time. And of course, he was amazing in Doctor Strangelove. He's also very funny in a movie called The Party, which is about an aspiring actor from India who gets invited to a lavish Hollywood party.
That
It's
is hilarious movie.
it is unbelievably politically incorrect now. I'm not even sure you can watch it because he's in blackface basically, but it's very funny. And he
It's
plays an important part in the history of comedy as one of the founders of the Goon Show, which is a BBC radio program from the 1950s that introduced the concept of surrealistic humor. So I think there probably would have been no Monty Python, which maybe would have been lost to you, or even a Saturday Night Live without the Goon Show.
Yeah,
Uh,
the influence is almost incalculable. The Beatles were avid fans of the radio show,
yeah.
and they did a lot of comedic skits of their own, more on British television than over here. And it's right out of that kind of shtick. Robin Williams, Conan O'Brien, the Spinal Tap guys, all credit Peter Sellers with basically setting them forth in their careers. He also has connections to James Bond. He
Okay.
he he played a major role in the 1967 James Bond spoof called Casino Royale, the first Casino Royale, and at that time he was married to a future Bond girl, Britt Eklund, and his influence. He was particularly good friends with Ringo and George Harrison, and in Ringo's case, they made a movie together, Magic Christian, which was a bomb. Ringo was on Peter Sellers' yacht when Peter Sellers gave Ringo the notion of Octopus's Garden,
Okay.
and that thereby giving birth to that song. And maybe, just maybe, Ringo imitated Sellers again when in 1980 he married his own Bond girl in the form of Barbara Bach from the Roger Moore film. So he was just an incredible figure as a high school dropout, but he also had many addiction and health and mental health issues, and prematurely died just a few months after this film came out, age
Right.
54.
Well, you forgot to mention that he is also in the Beatles documentary Get Back.
That's right.
He shows up very awkwardly for about 5 minutes, and they're goofing around so much that he feels awkward because he can't. I guess he can't keep up with their banter or something. And
Well,
he
there was debate among fans of that film as to who was out of it more, out to lunch more,
right.
Peter Sellers or John Lennon.
And I'll just say one more thing. I think he looks like John Lennon.
Do you?
Um, it's he's that weird thing with his mouth. It looks very, and his grin, his weird smile is a lot like John Lennon's.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, let's get to the movie itself. Jim, you have a summary?
Yeah, I do. I'll try to make it brief. There's a
Yeah,
lot
I
to
know this is
chew
a
on in this movie.
complicated movie.
But but Being There is a 1979 film based on celebrity author Jerzy Kosinski's 1970 novella. It tells the story of Chance, played by Sellers, a simple-minded gardener who has lived his entire life on a wealthy man's estate and whose entire education consists of incessantly watching and channel surfing television. When his benefactor dies, Chance is suddenly thrust into the outside world and is totally at sea until he is accidentally struck by the limousine of Eve Rand, played by Shirley MacLaine, the wife of powerful businessman Ben Rand, played by Melvin Douglas. This minor fluke accident takes Chance into the inner circles of politics and industry. His name becomes Chauncey Gardner. He wears fine suits, and his vague pronouncements about gardening are hailed as genius metaphors and wise insights into current social and economic conditions. Media and powerful figures in business and politics project wisdom onto this blank slate. Chance effortlessly and passively rises to national prominence, becoming a presidential advisor and potential candidate. His obtuse and reticent personality triggers numerous comedic and absurd scenarios throughout the film, with even some slapstick thrown in. I won't detail those now. I'm sure we'll be discussing quite a lot of them. If all this sounds absurd and farcical, it is. The film ends at Ben Rand's funeral, where at the burial site, Chance wanders off to a nearby lake and walks across the water, leaving us with the tantalizing notion that maybe, just maybe, Jesus has come back to Earth in 1979 in the form of one Peter Sellers. You've got to see it to believe it.
Okay, very good. I don't have anything to add. That was a very good summary. I will tell you that the movie was a hit, pretty big hit, not a huge hit. It had box office of $30 million, which made it the 15th most popular movie of the year. By way of comparison, the most popular movie in 1979 was the original Superman, which totaled 93 million. The other top movies of the year were the Amityville Horror, Rocky II, the first Star Trek movie, and the first Alien. So all those five movies turned out to be intellectually property IP driven franchises. So that was the beginning of the end for interesting movies. The movie's highly regarded by the critics. Siskel and Ebert each gave it 4 stars, for example. Sellers was nominated for an Oscar for Best Acting, and Melvin Douglas won one for Best Supporting Actor. The movie's been inducted into the National Film Preservation Board, into its National Film Registry, and was listed as number 26 on the American Film Institute's 100 Best Comedies of All Time. It was a very highly regarded movie for a while, but you almost never hear people talk about it anymore. So,
well, if the truth be told, Gary, I actually never heard of it.
Okay.
Until you suggested we watch it. And I went through a period in recent times where I was watching all of the Peter Sellers movies. I wonder if it has something to do with the rather nondescript anodyne title being there. I mean, it's not exactly a scintillating or memorable title.
Well, I have to tell you that every time I talk about this movie, I can't remember the title. I can't remember the name. Even this morning, I was lying in bed saying, "Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do this today," and I couldn't remember the name of it. So it might be the title. Also, I think it's because it's such a dry, really dry comedy. There is some slapstick, yes, but most of it is laughter that it's funny. It's kind of hard to laugh at. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
like, again, very highly regarded. People just don't know about it anymore, and no one ever talks about watching it.
Well, you mentioned the Oscars, and here's the thing that strikes me as incredibly ironic and a huge strike against the Oscars. There's 4 lead characters in this movie. Peter Sellers is the only one that never won an Oscar. That's just unbelievable.
Right.
Not that the others didn't deserve theirs, Melvin Douglas, Shirley MacLaine, Jack Warden, but they got Oscars and Sellers never did. Incredible.
Especially Jack Warden. Yeah.
And I think that I understand that, there's a handful of Oscar awards that are seen as real snubs. And I think the one in the ceremonies in 1980, where Dustin Hoffman won for Kramer versus Kramer over Peter Sellers, was viewed at the time and now as one of Hollywood's greatest snubs.
Yeah. That was I remember, as I recall, that was quite a challenging year. There were a lot of good actors. Well, Dustin Hoffman was hot at the time, and that kind of act was in vogue, that sort of over the top acting.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I'm getting the opinion that you might have enjoyed this movie. So, what did you like about it?
Well, no surprise from my earlier comments, watching Sellers on the screen is just so damn interesting and entertaining. And the other key performances were good as well, and we'll discuss them. I also like the time capsule of being back in the 1970s, even though this film did tend to invoke many of the things we love to hate about our most formative decade: the awful music and clothes, the terrible television, the slums, but it was all evocative to me nonetheless. I like that.
I have to agree with you, Ahmad. It was extremely evocative. It's interesting to look at movies that were made in the 70s and compare them to movies that are made now and set in the 70s. Obviously the ones that were made in the 70s are a lot more realistic, and they're much more unsparing about what a crummy decade that was.
Yeah, and you know what this film did, and I liked its sort of mix of genres, if you will. It blended 1970s cinematic gritty realism with farce and absurdity. And I kind of, that they seem contradictory, but they worked in this film for me.
Well, I liked it because I thought it was a shrewd satire of our fixation on messianic figures. You mentioned Jesus before, and
Yeah.
he's the main Messiah who come out of nowhere and become media sensations. This includes political, religious, cultural celebrities who seem like gurus, but who are just spouting nonsense. We could probably list a dozen right now.
And it
Um,
was big in the 70s, those kind of gurus.
yeah, yeah, it says a lot about our gullibility in us hearing what we want to hear. I also think it's kind of funny that the two people who see through Chauncey Gardner are the doctor and the lawyer, both of whom are cynically manipulating the system for their own gain. Uh,
That's right.
they're the ones who understand that Chauncey is not a wise man, but actually a simpleton. But they can't get anyone to believe them.
Yeah. I also like the mental exercise it put me through
Yeah,
of trying to get each of the points it was trying to make. Sometimes subtle points, sometimes obvious takedowns of our politics, leadership, culture, and use of language. Just when I thought I got one point, the movie was on to the next point it wanted to make. And you've accused me rightfully in the past of not wanting to be too challenged in my entertainment choices, which is why I tend to watch the same TV shows and movies over and over again. Whereas you like to be challenged in a theater. And in this case, I was challenged and I liked it.
okay, good. Well, what I liked was that there are no real villains in this. It would have been easy to make the Rands, the rich couple who take Chauncey into their home, into cardboard characters, evil, rich, moguls. But they're sympathetic humans who are worrying about things like death and loneliness. And because we can identify them, it's funnier when they are so gullible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were no bad people, but there were sure as hell a lot of stupid people.
Well, yeah, yeah. What didn't you like, if anything?
Well, it's a challenge every farcical movie or
Yeah,
book faces. You have to suspend your disbelief.
right.
And those of us who are rather literally minded, we have to put on hold practical questions about how chance could have gotten through life, leaving no trail, having no education, never even riding in a car or in an elevator, um, and how he was taken in so easily by the rich and the powerful, and how everyone around him could be so clueless. And so I found a complaint similar to the complaint I had about other movies where that feature simpleton characters, um, but are really more complex than being simple. Forrest Gump, The Rain Man, those kinds of movies. There's a fine line between intriguing and annoying in movies like this. And I'd say at some points it just got a little too tedious to see scenario after scenario with the same motif of a clueless protagonist and clueless people listening to him.
Yeah, that's the trouble with satires is that sometimes they do seem a little over the top.
Yeah,
Um, this is not a complaint about the movie itself, but I don't like the way contemporary critics use the movie to say it's more relevant than ever, and then point to politicians they think are vapid and have somehow bamboozled people that aren't as smart as they are. For example, I found a commentary from 2018 that said, and I'm quoting here, in 1979, the movie plot seemed outrageous and outlandish. In those days, many of us didn't believe Ronald Reagan could be taken seriously. None of us conceived of him as what we called a president. We would have deemed it impossible. I still do.
mm.
So this movie becomes a cudgel that people use to beat their opponents over the head to say, "Oh, this is more relevant than ever." And
Yeah, and you
I don't
could
know.
say
It's always
that,
been relevant. It's
and
not
the
more
other
relevant
side, yeah,
today.
always. And the other side could say the same thing about Obama.
Yeah.
Empty receptacles that people project things onto. And by the way, some political consultants would tell you that's exactly the key to success in politics
Well,
is that you be
sure.
you be sort of a blank canvas and you get different people from different constituencies projecting their own hopes and dreams and fears, seeing what they want to see, hearing what they want to hear. Tell me
That's,
what's new about that.
no, you're exactly right. The only difference in this movie is taken to an extreme, but which is what satire does. All
Yeah.
right. Do you have anything else you didn't like?
No, that was basically it.
Okay.
I mean, I could pick little
Yeah, I mean, we
things,
can
but
nitpick, but
yeah.
so what do you think the movie's trying to accomplish?
Well, I think through satire and farce, the film strives for social and even psychological commentary across a broad swath of our culture. There are obvious comments on the cravenness of our politics, businesses, legal system, healthcare, race relations, media and celebrity culture, and just how stupid and obtuse and shallow many of our so-called elites can be. And more intriguing than that to me, I think the movie was trying to show how different people have different perceptions of reality. We see what we want to see, hear what we want to hear. And as I mentioned, we project onto a guru or a politician or a religious leader or a pop singer the things that we want to see in them. And then I think it also, finally, I'd say, it makes a lot of comments about language, the use of language, the manipulation of language, and such. So I think we can all see purposes like that when we watch this movie. In the final analysis, I think its message is something of a downer, that there isn't much of a fixed reality, that reality is what each person sees by themselves and onto themselves. And look at the last line of the movie. Life is just a state of mind.
Well, very good. That's very good analysis. Our Middlebury professors would have been so happy to hear you espouse such profound thoughts. And I much smarter analysis there than I have. I just want to point out the movie was based. You already pointed out that the movie's based on a 1970 novella by Jerzy Kosinski, a Polish writer who managed to escape to the U.S. in 1957. Kosinski seems to have plagiarized the book from another book written in the 1930s. So the concept for the movie and the issues it address go back to the 1930s and then to the early 70s. So it's not really set in any particular time frame. The themes are universal.
Yeah,
I don't think the movie is a commentary on any particular political figure, since gurus have been mesmerizing the rich and powerful, going back to Rasputin, the wild Russian monk who beguiled Nicholas and Alexandra over 100 years ago.
yeah. I mean, I think it's more about human behavior than any particular fixed point in time. I mean, the extent to which people talk past each other
Yeah.
in this movie. One person says one thing and the other person hears nothing or hears something completely different. And I think that it's more a commentary on that. You mentioned Jerzy Kosinski. What a bizarre life he had. You know, he his family hid from the Nazis, and then after the Nazis lost, his father became a communist apparatchik in Poland. Jerzy didn't like communism, so he finagled his way to America. And before too long, he's one of these Manhattan man about town celebrity authors, you know, along the likes of Gore Vidal, Norman Mailer, Andy Warhol. He was on all the A-list parties. He was a guest on late night TV shows. As a good friend of Roman Polanski, he was
Uh,
also scheduled to be at the house where the Manson murders took place that night. But because of some lost luggage and flight delays, he never made it there that night. So that was a touch of luck. He was friends with everybody, from Henry Kissinger to George Harrison, but problems with booze and pills, and you mentioned the plagiarism accusations, that all caught up with him. And he committed suicide in 1991 at the age of 57. But a really interesting figure.
yeah, a real 70s figure.
Yeah.
Jim, you've already mentioned the Jesus angle. Any thoughts on any other additional other religious iconography in the movie?
there are episodes which relate to that. So, for example, when Ben Rand is dying and he's talking, having a heart to heart with his doctor, he utters the line, I'm going to find it here. Since he, meaning Chauncey, since he's been around, the thought of dying has been much easier for me.
Right.
Well, what is the purpose of religion but for that, and of Jesus? So, I mean, I think there are things like that peppered, throughout the movie.
All right. Well, I'll tell you a few more that I found, and I apologize for just springing this on you, but the main female character's name is Eve.
Yeah.
Um, and gardens are a major theme.
Hmm.
You already mentioned the Chauncey literally walking on water. He seems to speak in parables. He's never needed to go to the doctor or dentist, which suggests some kind of weird immortality.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, he might have had a virgin birth. No one knows who his father is.
And one of Eve's lines to Chauncey was, "You uncoiled my wants, you set me free."
Oh,
So there's that kind of, and that could be read in more than one way.
he's the
I mean, we'll
apple.
we'll talk about that
He's
scene.
the
Yeah,
snake in the garden.
yeah,
Um,
and
yeah.
so I think there's quite a bit of that. I'll also, since you mentioned Eve, I'd also have to point out that their last name was Rand,
Oh, yeah.
and at the time, Ayn Rand was a very big guru kind of figure. And sure enough, Ben, when without much prompting, starts pontificating throughout the movie on pure, absolute laissez-faire capitalism,
Right.
just like Ayn Rand did.
Right.
So that's what this movie. That's what I meant by this movie made me think a lot, and for once, I enjoyed thinking.
I should tell you that I cheated and listened to another podcast about this movie. And the people who were talking about the character's name said that they thought the Rand was named after the Rand Corporation. It's
Hmm.
like, are you kidding? That's so stupid. You're missing the point. This is obviously Ayn Rand.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's so clearly, Ayn Rand
Well, his
philosophy.
Ben's philosophy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's completely, why do we need welfare? Like, ooh,
Right.
what? Even you and I wouldn't say that out loud.
And there wasn't
Um,
exactly a lot of foreign policy in this
yeah.
movie, although there was a little.
All right. So all right, we've started to talk about the actors. So, what did you think about Peter Sellers' performance in the movie? You've kind of let me know, but what?
Just brilliant,
Yeah,
outstanding. I mean, and again, it's his reactions and facial expressions just showing so much throughout the movie. And I've always gone on the theory, me being a non-expert in this, that delivering lines are a piece of cake compared to reacting to lines and situations without words. And I thought he was great.
well, you're right. It's for someone who's made his name doing faces and voices and stuff. He maintains a completely flat affect throughout the entire movie, and to get these emotions across, it's very impressive. We need to highlight how simple the character is. He's never been off the property, doesn't know how to read or write, can't feed himself unless someone gives him something to eat. All he knows about is gardening. He never says anything really interesting, yet Sellers manages to make him a sympathetic character. Uh,
Yeah, and we also have to point out, just to give people a little more of the flavor, despite everything you mentioned, he does a late night TV appearance in which is proclaimed as absolutely brilliant TV appearance, even though he doesn't say anything. He's offered a book deal, even though he can't read or write. Um, Ben Rand wants to turn his entire business empire over to him when he dies. And Ben's wife, Eve, desperately wants to have sex with him, even though Chance has no idea how to perform until he watches some passionate kissing on TV and imitates it. So, I mean, and Sellers had to maneuver his way through all these scenarios in what I thought was really an Oscar winning performance.
Well, and the other
So,
thing too is that he starts off being completely unsympathetic, and then as he goes along, he doesn't show any emotion in the beginning, early in the movie, but he develops empathy over the course of the movie as he's exposed to other people. He doesn't get any smarter, but he gets more sensitive and shows that he's really sympathetic. He's really sad when Ben dies in a
Yeah,
different way that he
yeah,
wasn't sympathetic the old man died. He completely showed no emotion when he heard that he was dead.
yeah, absolutely. There is character growth here, and I think that's easy to miss, but it's there.
All right, what about Shirley MacLaine as Eve? She's a billionaire's younger wife who falls in love with Chauncey Gardiner. Shirley MacLaine has had one of the great runs in Hollywood history. She'd made her film debut in 1955 when she was in Alfred Hitchcock's The Trouble with Harry. And over the course of her career, she's won all the awards, been a household name for being a bit of an oddball with a focus on mysticism, reincarnation, and crystals. But I saw her most recently in the TV show Only Murders in the Building, so she's still acting. She's still getting paid for to do her stuff.
Yeah, she's plugging along at age 91. She does have a reputation for being an oddball, so much so that when I was watching this movie, and remember that scene where she and her husband and Chauncey are having dinner at that huge dining room table,
Right.
and that's the first time you see Chauncey's gardening metaphors get taken all out of proportion by some kind of an audience. And he Chauncey starts in on gardening, and Eve picks up on that and starts uttering some new age gobbledygook about it. And I burst out laughing. I said, Shirley MacLaine is playing herself. She's playing herself. I met her once.
Okay.
I was at a reception. It was in Davos before Davos became
Okay.
this dark place. But the governor I was working for, Governor of California, Governor Duke Majan, was hosting a reception there to promote California, and including wine and all that kind of stuff. And Shirley MacLaine was there, and I introduced her to the governor. And then the governor moved on, and I hung back a little bit. And she was vivacious and lively. And true to form, she said, "Oh," she grabbed my arm. "He's such a nice man. He's such a nice man." Of course, I didn't vote for him. and and so she was her quirky self even back then. I actually think she's a better actor than her brother,
Oh yeah. Well, her brother being Warren
Warren
Beatty.
Beatty.
Yeah.
And if all you have to do is watch her Oscar-winning performance in terms of endearment to understand that, I think she's better than he is.
Well, she's had a much more longer and more varied career than he has. She's 45 when she made this movie, and she still looks beautiful in a way that modern movie stars still look beautiful.
Yeah.
And I only mention this because last week I was making observations about Ava Gardner looking old at 40. But from 1963 to 1979, when female movie stars learned how to maintain their youthfulness well into their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. Let's talking about someone who was old and looked old. Melvin Douglas plays Ben Rand, the super rich tycoon who falls for Chauncey Gardner's charms. Like Shirley MacLaine, he had a long Hollywood career, first as a suave leading man in the 1930s, and then as a mature older man in the 1960s and 70s. What do you think?
Well, he seems to play these kinds of senior political and business powerhouses well as he got older. Remember a few years earlier, the movie The Candidate, and where the candidate, Robert Redford, was meant to be Jerry Brown, and the candidate's father, with whom he didn't get along, was meant to be Pat Brown, former governor of California. And Melvin Douglas played Pat Brown and did it beautifully. I mean, he was really nasty, but always smiling. You got to check your fillings on the way out of the door kind of politician. But since this is the celluloid president, we have to mention that he was also married to Helen Gahagan Douglas, who was according to Richard Nixon, was pink right down to her underwear. Helen Gahagan Douglas was Richard Nixon's opponent for the Senate seat in 1950 for California, and Nixon was rock'em sock'em then, and he won that Senate seat. And 2 years later, he got anointed as vice president. So we've got to mention a connection to another president of Melvin Douglas here. But I thought he was really good in this
Yeah, no, I
movie.
think so. I think he was kind of perfect for this role. I mean,
Yeah,
he looks like Rudolph Murdoch today, you know?
yeah. No, I
Um,
thought he was excellent.
yeah, he's obviously a very capable and accomplished film actor.
Well, he won the Triple Crown. He won Oscars, Emmy, and Tonys through his career. So he won all the awards.
He didn't win the Grammy, so he didn't get the EGOT.
Is that the new
Yeah, well,
quadruple crown? Yeah.
yeah, the quadruple crown. Yeah, there's like 17 or 20 of them that have won the Oscar.
Or
What is it?
Emmy,
Oscar,
Oscar, Emmy,
Grammy.
Tony.
No, it's Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony.
Yeah.
All right, what about Jack Warden, who plays the president?
Well, I just enjoyed the way he played the grumpy, dyspeptic, and impotent President Bobby. I don't know. I wonder why Bobby was chosen. It couldn't have been taking after Jimmy because when Bobby was named, it was 1970.
Right.
Um, but he played the part mostly for laughs, pretty obvious laughs. But I thought it was kind of fun. I love the way he would interrupt important policy or political meetings by saying such things as, I want my eggs poached today, or I got to go take a leak. So I mean, he's playing it pretty well. He's also an Oscar winner for Heaven Can Wait. And I first saw him in his breakthrough role was in one of my favorite movies, which was 12 Angry Men. He was one of the jurors.
Yeah.
What do you think of him?
I thought he was okay. I thought he was fine. He didn't really seem presidential to me. Melvin Douglas seemed more presidential and had more gravitas. This is one of these movies where you can't really tell if he's Republican or Democrat, but I think we're supposed to assume that he's a Republican since Rand and he were such allies and Rand was such a reactionary. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you can't really be sure because until about a year ago, the richest CEOs in the country were all Democrats. So maybe he was.
Yeah. He was also in All the President's Men. He was one of the Washington Post editors,
Hmm. Right,
Rosenfield.
sure.
And so I remember him from that. And I have to give a shout out to his horny First Lady wife, played by Alice Hinson, who, as an aside, played Mavis Anderson, Punk Anderson's wife. Punk Anderson and Mavis were the best friends of Jock and Ellie Ewing in Dallas, and she was fine. It was a bit part, but this movie came out right as Dallas was becoming a mega hit, and both are produced by Lorimar. So, maybe Alice Hinson was sort of one of the stock characters that Lorimar wanted to cast.
Well, we've really hit the triple crown today of your fixations: Beatles, James Bond,
Bond, yeah,
and Nixon, I guess.
absolutely.
All
Let's
right,
start with this number one.
let's talk about Hal Ashby, who was the director.
Yeah,
And he's made some of the most 70s style movies in the 1970s, including Harold and Maude, The Last Detail, Coming Home, and Shampoo. Have you seen any of these movies? You have any thoughts on Hal Ashby?
well, he seems to be like the counterculture director of that period,
Yeah.
and he looked the part too, for the most part, and he burned out the way a lot of the counterculture did as well, and he eventually became unhireable because of his addictions, booze and pills and drugs and all that. But for several years, Harold and Maude was my favorite movie of all time. I
Right.
just love that movie. It
Yeah.
was even more absurd than this movie. It was a dark comedy about a barely out of his teens young man who liked to enact different kinds of grisly fake suicides and who eventually found meaning through an affair with an 80-year-old. And the other thing about that movie, there's fantastic music by Yusef Islam, the artist formerly known as Cat Stevens. So that's I see Harold and Maude in this movie kind of bracketing Ashby's a little more conventional films.
Yeah, I love Harold and Maude too, and that's also one of my favorite movies. What all the Hal Ashby movies have in common, though, are traits that appear in many of the most acclaimed movies of the 1970s. Cynicism, disdain for authority, a sense of corruption and hopelessness. If you think of movies that he didn't make, like Chinatown, The Last Picture Show, Cabaret, Nashville, all those movies are so basically cynical. This movie is cynical, but not in a nasty way. It's
Yeah,
sort of cynical in an affectionate way. Like, well, it's just human nature for people to be gullible. And as I said, there's no villains in the movie, but you're right. He burned the candle at both ends, and I think he died. I think this maybe was his last, not his last movie, but one of his last movies. This is kind of the end for both Peter Sellers, Melvin Douglas, and Hal Ashby.
yeah, yeah.
All right, let's turn to the history. In a fictional movie, we can't really criticize the history of it, but we can talk about whether it's plausible and whether there's any fidelity to the time in which it was made. As you've mentioned earlier, it's even trickier when you have a fable, which by definition means that it stretches the imagination to make a point. But so let's say what feels real and what doesn't.
Well, as we've discussed, I think it evoked the time of the 70s pretty well. The atmospherics surrounding the characters, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I give it credit for that. The 70s were a tough time economically, with more at play than just the usual business cycle, but rather deep disruptions, stagflation, wealth disparities, oil embargoes, and clueless politicians having little more to offer than banalities. Remember when
Yeah.
with inflation now, where we're Jerry Ford's program where we would wear these buttons supposedly. I mean, so and the banalities in this movie that are adopted by the president, like "Don't worry, winter is always followed by spring." So, and the film was made in the latter half of Jimmy Carter with double-digit inflation, interest rates, and a general loss of confidence. The Iranians held our hostages. It was a grumpy time, and in many respects, historically, this is kind of a grumpy movie.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you that the president's focus on the economy rings true. It does seem a little unlikely, though, that the president would just offer patience and not have some sort of program with a lot of window dressing. I mean, he adopts what he thinks is Chauncey Gardner's advice and doesn't do anything because the cycles in the economy, which is true. I mean, but a politician would be smarter than to just say, like, wait it out because voters don't have patience.
Yeah.
Also seems likely that at a Washington funeral, the pallbearers would be talking politics instead of being in deep mourning over their dear friend.
Well, that's
Uh,
for sure.
but I don't buy that a handful of oligarchs can eject a sitting president and replace him with someone like Chauncey Gardner. That's a
Yeah.
very old-fashioned way of thinking that there's this, I mean, maybe from the 30s. Well, no, I mean, power brokers were able to keep Truman from running again in 1952, but they wouldn't be able to do that. In fact, the power
Well,
brokers tried to keep Jimmy Carter from running in 70 and 80, and he
well,
won.
I don't know. I think you could extrapolate. I mean, power brokers got Nixon out. There's all sorts of,
Well, I guess you could say the power brokers got Biden out.
and they got JFK out. So it depends. No, it depends where you're going with this point. I see your point. It's not going to be benignly, which would be how I would define a bunch of fat cats just deciding on who's the president, you
Right,
know.
right.
But
This is maybe a nit, but there's no residence in Washington, D.C. that's as magnificent as the Rand's house in this movie. It was actually filmed in the Biltmore Estates, which is 10 times larger than the biggest house in Washington, D.C., which is Twin Oaks, which is up near the cathedral, and
oh
it's now
yeah,
the home of the Taiwanese embassy. But yeah, so it seemed a
yeah,
little extravagant. Well, I guess again, when you're in a fable, you're talking about things that are way over the top. But we both know Washington geography well enough to know that you could never have grounds like that in the middle of a
right.
city.
except for the Naval Observatory, maybe, but that's not an ornate, that's not really an ornate house.
Any other observations about accuracy?
No, I thought if you have to start with the idea that you're looking at the characters through the lens of exaggeration.
Right.
And with that note, I thought all the characters, except of course for Chance, were plausible to me.
Yeah.
Plausibly exaggerated, but plausible.
Okay, let's talk about our favorite scenes. What's your favorite scene?
When Chance met the president in
Uh-huh.
the presence of Ben Rand, I thought it was hilarious the way he kept staring at the president, how when they shook hands, he wouldn't let his hand go. And this is where you saw the best parts of Jack Warden's acting, his reactions
Yeah.
to things like that, trying to get his hands loose
Well, I gave
from
him the two-handed, the two-handed
right.
handshake. Instead of just
Yeah.
putting out the one hand, you grab both hands and you're pulling both hands. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
overly friendly.
And then Chance starts uttering his banalities about gardening. And Ben saying, isn't that brilliant? And you can see that the president thinks it's a bunch of bull. But like any pliable politician, he has to get with the program and does. And
Uh-huh.
pretty soon he ends up giving them in a speech before the nation. And then of course the punchline of the whole scene was when as the meeting ended, Ben calls the president Bobby. And so, true to form, Chance imitates him and calls the president Bobby instead of Mr. President. And you can see the president's shocked reaction to that, just a glimmer of it. I just thought that whole scene was well done.
Well, the scene that made the biggest impression on me was when Chance leaves the old man's house for the first and last time, and we realize it's actually in a slum. There's this old house that's been hasn't changed in probably 50 years, and you walk outside and it's a slum.
Yeah.
And outside it's loud and vibrant, with the soundtrack playing a funk jazz version of "Thus Spake Zarathustra," which is also known as the 2001 A Space Odyssey theme music.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, I was watching it with subtitles, and the subtitle said the sound that they were playing 2001 Space Odyssey music. And it's like, okay, instead of saying,
I really like that scene
yeah,
too. You know what? It made me think it was a reverse Wizard of Oz
right,
scene. Instead of opening the door, Dorothy opening the door to this beautiful, colorful world, Chance opens the door to this rather ugly, depressing world.
yeah, okay. And then walking down the street, it's like,
Oh yeah.
it's such a shock to the viewers, and I'm sure it was a shock to because everything's been so cool and calm and quiet, and you go outside and it's like life is pulsating in that slum. All right, what else?
Well, we already mentioned this sort of, but Ben's death scene
Okay, yeah, I got
in
that too.
which Chance shows much more emotional reaction compared to at the beginning of the film when his benefactor died. And as we said, it suggests some actual character growth in him.
Yeah.
So I just thought the whole scene was very touching.
So I thought the funniest scene is where the black maid from the old man's house, who's taken care of him for years and fed him and probably dressed him and all that kind of stuff. She sees Chancey Gardner on TV
Yeah.
and expresses her astonishment, disgust, and she says, "Had no brains at all. Was stuffed full of rice pudding between the ears. Shortchanged by the Lord and dumb as a jackass. And look at him now. Yes, sir. All you have to do is be white in America and get whatever you want."
I
So,
I actually thought I like that too. I thought the movie actually showed the shallowness of the race dialogue,
yeah,
today's race dialogue. So on the one hand, you have Chauncey very benignly doing incredibly racist stereotyping,
right, right, right.
you know, and doing a double take when he realizes doctor is black. Um, And then because he had met basically a black hoodlum once he emerged out of in the reverse Wizard of Oz, he immediately thought the doctor and the black hoodlum from another world were related.
Or knew
And
each
all this,
other. Yeah.
yeah, knew each other. And all this was without, venom,
Yeah.
without racist venom, but it was
Right.
racist. And then you have, what's her name? Shirley, was it? The maid?
Yeah.
You have the maid's over simplistic reaction. Well, everything is due to race and society and nothing else matters.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So I think it's more actually applicable to today's shallow race debates than to maybe to then. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, that sort of struck a note of
Yeah, I
relevance
don't
to
think
me.
that was supposed to be taken as a commentary. What she was saying was more of a spoof on her in a way, because if you think about it, there are 200 million white Americans who don't get to advise the president. You don't have to be an idiot to, most idiots don't get to advise the president. Um, what did you think about the scene where the president's in bed with his wife and has some performance issues?
Well,
That was,
kind of gratuitous,
kind of gratuitous. Yeah.
but I still thought it was funny.
Played for laughs. I actually did laugh. But I guess we're supposed to think that he's kind of impotent as a president too.
Or you can have all the political power in the world, be the most
Right.
powerful man in the world, but you still can't perform in the bedroom. I was That's why you jump from scenario to scenario in this film, and some are going to stick with you and some aren't. But that was one. But I think one of my favorites was the so-called sex scene
Uh-huh.
between Chauncey and Eve, where the culmination of it is that the sex was when she was writhing on the floor in orgasmic pleasure, and he was on the bed trying to stand on his head. That's why I say you got to see this because it's hard to explain. But
Yeah, well, you stepped on my one of my favorite line, which is "I like to watch." He
yeah,
says "I
yeah,
like to watch" about 10 times, and when Eve asks him, "Well, what do you want?" He says "I like to watch." So she's like, "Oh, okay." So she gets down on the floor and starts finding her own pleasure. So,
and yet even so,
and he's watching TV.
he's watching TV and then trying to stand on his head because
All
some
right.
yoga instructor was doing that on TV. And even after all that, afterwards, um, she made those comments that indicate it was the best sex she ever had. So,
Well, she's married to an 80-year-old guy, so
right,
okay. Any other scenes? I mean, we could go on. This is best scene and best line are very hard
right. I
to
actually found
separate.
it easier to list scenes
Yeah.
than lines.
All right. I already talked about "I like to watch" is my favorite line. I also the TV reporter after at Chauncey says he likes to watch TV. Again, I like to watch, oh, you like to watch TV. The TV reporter says, "Well, that is probably the most honest admission to come from a public figure in years. Few men in public life will have the courage not to read newspapers. None, but none that this reporter has ever met have the guts to admit it."
Everything was turned into like
Right.
genius type of comment. It was so funny. I already mentioned the one of Ben telling his doctor about you know
Yeah.
how soothing it was to have Chance around. I also liked when Ben said to Chance, "You don't play games with words to protect yourself." And I think that was one of the points of this movie, the sort of the obtuse language, the manipulative, tricky language, and be plain spoken. Of course, the irony is that while Chance didn't play games with words, people listening to the words played games with them.
Right. Exactly.
So, so
Exactly.
I like that line. And then I liked when the pallbearers at the end were scheming as they were carrying Ben Rand's casket. And one of them said, having a background turns into a swamp and invites scrutiny. Our, our one chance, get it, to hold on to the presidency may be Chauncey Gardner. I
Yeah.
like that one.
Also, and the president tries to get his sends all the FBI, CIA, everyone out to figure out who this guy
Yeah.
is, and no one can find anything. And the president says, "Could someone have destroyed his files?" And the FBI director says, "Highly unlikely, sir. In fact, the boys around the bureau feel that the only person capable of pulling it off would be an ex-FBI man." At which point, the CIA director objects. "I don't think that's true, sir." You
I
know.
know.
All right. And I thought the president's speech, which you already mentioned, with his all the metaphors about the seasons, it's funny. I'm just going to read. Let us not fear the inevitable chill and storms of winter and autumn. Instead, let us anticipate the rapid growth of springtime. Let us await the rewards of summer. As in a garden of the earth, let us accept and appreciate the times when the trees are bare, as well as when the times when we pick the fruit. You know,
If you and I, as speechwriters, had written those lines, we would have had early end to our careers.
all right. Let's say, all right, how do you think this movie is relevant today? I think we've probably already kind of gone over that, but anything
Well,
you got to say?
yeah, one thing jumped out at me. All you have to do is substitute chances, TV remote control, then with everyone's iPhone today,
Right.
and the relevance will scream at you. The iPhones allow everyone to be chance, to live in their own bubbled world, to think they know everything, to project their own love, fear, loathing, personal psychological issues onto the instant celebrities and entertainment and politics created by the digital age. One important difference, though, is that in this film, everyone seemed to think that everything Chance said was deep and profound when it wasn't. Nowadays, in an era of social media, everyone seems to think everything they say is so deep and profound and original when it really isn't. Chance was not a narcissist. And today, most of the chances are narcissists.
All right. I'll also say that if you look at the presidential debates from 50 to 60 years ago, they were much more substantive than they are today. So our political discourse has really been dumbed down.
Yeah.
Social media has made it worse, and I hesitate to think what will happen when we get all our news from TikTok. The movie is a warning not to hear what you want to hear, but to listen to what politicians and influencers are actually saying. We always seem to get surprised when a politician says he's going to do something and then he actually does it.
Yeah. We've discussed this before, but we live in a time when how good you talk is more important
Yeah.
and a stronger key to success than how well you think, how you behave, and what you achieve. Do we sound like grumpy old boomers or what?
Yeah. And then when we were growing up, people were talking about how the discourse of those years were dumbed down. So
Yeah.
if you were a high school teacher, or would you assign this movie?
No, no, but it's a good candidate for film school, for acting workshops, and culture studies in college, I think.
Yeah, I don't think so either. The scene where Shirley MacLaine is writhing and moaning on the floor of the bedroom would just be too embarrassing for everybody. I would show it to a college class, though. I mean, for all the reasons you discussed. All right, what's your grade for the movie?
Well, I give it an A. I think it
Okay.
was very good. I highly recommend it. You can watch it while thinking hard about all the nuggets of meaning it tries to create, or you can just sit back and enjoy all the satirical and absurd scenarios. It's up to you.
Okay. Same here, same grade, same comments. All right, well, we finished another one. Any final thoughts?
No, I just really like this movie.
Okay.
I'm glad I heard of it now.
What we're going to do next, just in case you want to plan for this, is we're going to watch the Netflix series about the assassination of James A. Garfield. The name of it is called Death by Lightning. It's about his assassination. So go out and watch that. It's on Netflix, 4 episodes, 4 hours. And in closing, I want to say that the podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, most podcast platforms. You can also watch it on YouTube, and you can subscribe any of those places. If you have any comments, you can send them to me at garyholmes76 at Gmail. And unless you have anything else to say, Jim, I'll say goodbye.
Not a chance, Gary.
Okay. And okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.